Hi, I'm Tawny Plattis, and you're listening to Dirty Bits, the show that covers the sexy, scandalous, and salacious stories from history your teacher probably left out. On this special Independence Day episode of the Dirty Bits podcast, we take a closer look at the political scandals from United States history, featuring James Buchanan, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, William Campbell Preston Breckinridge, Richard Mentor Johnson, and David I. Walsh. This episode is structured a bit differently than our regularly scheduled programming, and each story will vary in length, depending on the amount of reliable sources I was able to find on each subject. We're also very excited to welcome our newest LoveBugs to the show. Lindy, Penny, Vanessa, and Tilly. Welcome. And we so appreciate all of our biggest LoveBugs, like Stephen, Hannah, Sarah, Stacy, Heather, Dina, Jeremy, Paul, Mike, Trenton, Aaron, and all the rest of you. We love you guys. Be sure to join in on the Dirty Bits discussion on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We love talking with our listeners, and we would be absolutely delighted if you joined in with us. You might even get a shout out on our next episode. All of our links are available in the show notes here and on our website, tawnyvoice.com/dirtybits. And lastly, we've had a few of you request longer, more frequent episodes, and you've expressed a desire for even more dirty bits. We would love to bring the show to you full time. And if that's something you want to see, you can help out by becoming a Dirty Birdie by visiting us at patreon.com/dirtybits. Stay tuned after the show to hear some promos from some other indie podcasters we're buddies with. Enjoy. James Buchanan was the last president born in the 18th century, the only president from Pennsylvania, and the only president to remain unmarried. He was born in a log cabin in Cove Gap, Pennsylvania, to a couple of merchants and farmers, and was one of 11 children because, as my fellow British Isle descendants know, that's how you do it when you're Irish. James's dad moved the family to Mercersburg and soon became the wealthiest person in town as a merchant as well as through his real estate investments. But with this prosperity came a very naughty James who was nearly expelled from the village academy due to his poor behavior. He whined and bitched until the school board allowed him to remain enrolled. He then subsequently graduated with honors, and I'm sure Daddy's money had absolutely nothing to do with that. Buchanan then moved to the capital of the state, which was Lancaster at the time, and became a student of the most prominent lawyer there, James Hopkins. Buchanan was admitted to the bar in 1812, began his own practice, and rapidly rose to prominence, earning the equivalent to $197,918 in 2016. He began his political career in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 1814 as a Federalist, which meant he was a proponent of federally funded internal improvements, a high tariff, and national bank. He was an active Freemason, even becoming the master of the Masonic Lodge No. 43 in Lancaster and District Deputy Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. Now in 1818, Buchanan met a gal named Anne Caroline Coleman at a grand ball, and they began courting. She was the daughter of a wealthy iron tycoon, and her brother-in-law was a colleague of Buchanan. They were engaged by the following year, but didn't spend much time together. He was supposedly busy dealing with political projects and his law firm, but people were super gossipy and were like, "He's just marrying her for her money. He's involved with other women." And she wrote him letters saying, "Hey, people are talking like mad shit and you're not saying anything. What gives, bro?" She actually went on to break off the engagement when he visited a friend's wife, and then suddenly died soon afterwards, with the doctor who cared for her saying it was the first instance he had ever known of where hysteria was the cause of death. Some historians theorize she actually overdosed on concentrated opium, but there isn't really sufficient evidence to support it either way. When the literal lady killer asked to attend her funeral, Anne's dad was like, "That's gonna be a big fuck no." After that, Buchanan was never known to date or show any physical or emotional interest in another woman. Rumors of him sleeping with President James Polk's widow has no basis, but the rumors are still there and they're fun to read. So 1820 rolls up, and during his time in Congress, he becomes a big fanboy of Andrew Jackson, as well as an avid defender of states' rights. He actually can be blamed for helping to organize Jackson's followers into the Democratic Party. Buchanan thought that a grip of New England congressmen were dangerous, kooky radicals, and in the process, he became besties with Southern congressmen, especially William R. King of Alabama. Remember that name because it'll be coming up again later.
Hey, baby, you spelled coming incorrectly.
No, I did not. President Jackson then offered Buchanan the position of United States ambassador to Russia after he was reelected in 1832. And Buchanan was like, Russia? Really? Are you sure? And Andrew Jackson goes, I thought you loved me. So Buchanan packs his bags and spends 18 months in Russia, where he learned French, which actually makes sense because it was the language of diplomacy at the time. And he spent his time helping negotiate commercial and maritime treaties, but was like, I need to drink something besides vodka, and this snow is a total drag. So he goes back to the U.S. and goes up to Senator William Wilkins and says, tradesies! And Wilkins takes his place in Russia, and Buchanan is elected to the legislature. He then became a vocal proponent of states' rights, saying, we have just as little right to interfere with slavery in the South as we have to touch the right of petition, and told the abolitionists to stop stirring the pot and to sit down and shut the hell up. He was a real peach. He eventually became Secretary of State in the Polk administration, where he first advised a compromise with Britain during negotiations concerning Oregon, but then was like, no, actually annex that bitch. And then, in the Mexican-American War, he advised President Polk against taking the territory around New Mexico, but as the war started wrapping up, he yet again was like, nah, JK, annex that shit too. And Polk was like, this guy is just trying to weasel his way into the presidency, and I've kind of had it up to here with his shenanigans. So Polk's administration ends, and Zachary Taylor is elected. So Buchanan decides to take it easy for a while, but is still closely following politics and ends up campaigning for president. He writes this public letter saying that a proposed law to ban slavery in the territory that was acquired in the Mexican War was divisive and fanatical, because outlawing human chattel was just kooky. His buddies called him Doughface, which meant in so many words that he was super willing to be led around by others with a stronger will than his own. It was a phrase specifically used at the time to refer to a Northerner who had Southern sympathies in the years leading up to the American Civil War. And this bipartisanly pissed off everyone because these particular politicians were wavering pansy asshats who didn't want to be bothered with bullshit like running the country, which was frustrating to those who did care because their votes were crucial to the future of the states. Historians credit John Randolph, a representative from Virginia, for coining the term during the Missouri Compromise debates. And the guy could not get down with Northerners who voted with the South and straight up called them weak men, timid men, half-baked men, and gave them no ice for such a scathing burn like that. Randolph is quoted as saying, they were scared at their own dough faces. Yes, they were scared at their own dough faces. We had them, and if we wanted 3 more, we could have had them. Yes, and if these had failed, we could have 3 more of these men, whose conscience and morality and religion extend to 36 degrees and 30 minutes north latitude. What's especially interesting about the phrase is it's a homonym. So while Doughface is spelled D-O-U-G-H in many of the sources I found, there's also a possibility that he actually was referring to deer, as in D-O-E. Representative Randolph was really into hunting, so much so that he would bring his hunting dog right into Congress with him like a little fur baby. So it isn't totally far-fetched that he may have been commenting on how wimpy these guys were, and it's totally possible he may have simply been calling them Bambi. But while Buchanan won the support of many Southern delegates, surprise, surprise, he ended up losing to Franklin Pierce. Instead of serving as the vice presidential nominee, he said, thanks but no thanks, and the convention nominated his close friend and possible love of his life, William King. Buchanan hung out with William Rufus King, the vice president to Franklin Pierce, a lot. They lived together in a Washington boarding house for 10 years until William departed for France. King was known to refer to their relationship as a communion, and they would attend social events side by side. And what's interesting is that their friends noticed it too, and they weren't hesitant to offer their own commentary on the situation. Andrew Jackson, who Buchanan already had a total bromance with, called them Miss Nancy and Aunt Fancy. Miss Nancy being a word used to describe an effeminate man in the 19th century. Aaron V. Brown even called William Rufus King Buchanan's better half, while James W. Lowen described them as Siamese twins, and the wife of a cabinet member voiced her suspicions as well. When you look at the sources, it's easy to see that Buchanan could have been positively enamored with King. He allegedly fell in love with King's romanticized perspective of Southern culture and even adopted his mannerisms. They were both incredibly politically ambitious and planned on running together as POTUS and VP. But then King was appointed as the U.S. ambassador to France and was sent to Paris, and the two were tragically separated. Buchanan actually wrote to Cornelia Roosevelt, wife of the paternal grandfather to Theodore Roosevelt, "I am now solitary and alone, having no companion in the house with me. I have gone a-wooing to several gentlemen, but have not succeeded with any one of them. I feel that it is not good for a man to be alone, and I should not be astonished to find myself married to some old maid who can nurse me when I'm sick, provide good dinners for me when I am well, and not expect from me any very ardent or romantic affection," which makes it pretty darn clear. Shortly after President Pierce's inauguration, William caught tuberculosis and sadly passed away about 4 years before Buchanan would be elected president. Buchanan described William as among the best, the purest, and the most consistent public men I have known. Then Buchanan headed off to England as ambassador of the United States, which was pretty darn convenient for him as the nation was losing their shit over the Kansas-Nebraska Act's Popular Sovereignty Clause, which was a policy that let all the white guys decide whether or not they wanted slavery in their territories. When the Democratic National Convention met in 1856 and wrote a platform that pretty much lined up with Buchanan's views to a T, he found himself leading first on the ballot and basically responded with, "Oh, me? Well, shucks, I'm not gonna fight you on it." And then he was elected president. He was like, "I'm going to be up there in history with George motherfucking Washington." But he epically failed to do jack shit about the whole pro-slavery versus anti-slavery partisanship at the time, and then the Civil War happened because the country was so divided. Again, there was a civil war because the President of the United States was unable to unify a deeply divided country. When giving his victory speech, he accused the Republican Party of being dangerous and unfairly attacking the South, and stated, "The object of my administration will be to destroy sectional party, North or South, and to restore harmony to the Union under a national and conservative government." And he was a total ass clown from day one. Dred Scott, Panic of 1857, Utah War, Bleeding Kansas, all happened on his watch. By 1860, the House had created the Cavode Committee to investigate the administration for evidence of bribery and extortion in exchange for votes in an attempt to impeach Buchanan because he was royally fucking everything up. While they weren't able to establish the grounds to do so, they did issue a report that exposed corruption and abuse of power among the cabinet, and there were several allegations from Republican members that Buchanan had attempted to bribe Congress. Buchanan is quoted as saying he passed triumphantly through this ordeal, to which the Republicans said, "Okay," and proceeded to distribute thousands of copies of the Cavode Committee's report throughout the nation during that year's presidential election. Consequently, Abraham Lincoln was elected, and another Democrat wouldn't become president again until the late 1880s. So Lincoln wins, and everyone is like, "Dude, there's about to be a secession. We're not going to be united much longer." And Buchanan is like, "God damn it, I have to talk about this in my last chit-chat with Congress. Fuck." He was super wishy-washy and said, states can't legally secede, but the federal government can't legally prevent them from seceding. This is totally those meddling northern kids' fault, questioning slavery in the South. And then he straight up said, if they did not repeal their unconstitutional and obnoxious enactments, the injured states, after having first used all peaceful and constitutional means to obtain redress, would be justified in revolutionary resistance to the government of the Union. His only solution to solve this whole owning people thing was to create an explanatory amendment, reaffirming the constitutionality of slavery in the states, the fugitive slave laws, and popular sovereignty in the territories. Again, guy was a real peach. But both the North and the South were like, no, because he wouldn't commit to putting the kibosh on secession, but he also wouldn't grant the right to it either. He was so ridiculous, the Treasury Secretary resigned 5 days after Buchanan's speech, saying something to the effect of, this guy is a fucking fool. The end of his administration was a complete shit show. South Carolina declared secession. He refused to fire the Secretary of War, John B. Floyd, despite being embroiled in an embezzlement scandal. Floyd ended up resigning, but not before sending a boatload of firearms to the South, aka the Confederacy. Buchanan kept taking advice from counselors from the Deep South, and then those guys let South Carolina know what they were talking about, and a bunch of other Southerners went all WikiLeaks on the administration's plans too. So Buchanan is scrambling last minute to reach some kind of compromise to stop secession, and he just epically fails again and again and again. He even made one last-ditch effort to get the recently elected Lincoln to call for a constitutional convention, or, in his words, fucking something, to resolve the issue on slavery. Those weren't actually his words, but Lincoln did say, nah, to meeting with Buchanan. By 1861, 6 more slave states had seceded, and Buchanan was wavering per usual on what to do, first deciding to surrender Fort Sumter, then changing his mind, then deciding to reinforce it finally by sending 250 men and supplies on the ship, the Star of the West, without asking anyone to provide covering fire for the ship carrying said men and supplies. So the ship was forced to return north without having delivered anything, and despite this being an act of war, Buchanan went, meh, and still tried to compromise right up until Lincoln took office. Buchanan looked at the tall, lanky president and said, your problem now, Slender Man, and dipped out the back door, leaving Honest Abe to handle what eventually became the American Civil War. Buchanan spent his retirement dodging public blame for letting that Civil War thing happen, so much so that his contemporaries referred to it as Buchanan's War. He was getting hate mail on the daily, and stores had his picture prominently displayed with the eyes inked over in red, a noose around his neck, and the word traitor stamped across his forehead. Newspapers accused him of collusion with the Confederacy, and his former cabinet members who ended up working in Lincoln's administration were like, I ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole. He was so disturbed by the attacks, he actually became sick with depression, but began defending himself in 1862 when he started posting tweets or letters in the National Intelligence newspaper. His self-defense eventually turned into a full-fledged memoir he titled Mr. Buchanan's Administration on the Eve of Rebellion. Then he caught a cold and died. The day before his death, Buchanan said, "History will vindicate my memory." And he's consistently ranked among the least successful presidents because he was either unable or unwilling to do anything regarding the secession. Biographer Philip Klein says, Buchanan assumed leadership when an unprecedented wave of angry passion was sweeping over the nation. That he held the hostile sections in check during these revolutionary times was in itself a remarkable achievement. His weakness in the stormy years of his presidency were magnified by enraged partisans of the North and South. His many talents, which in a quieter era might have gained for him a place among the great presidents, were quickly overshadowed by the cataclysmic events of Civil War and by the towering Abraham Lincoln. But when researching Buchanan, who may very well have been the first not totally in the closet president, I couldn't help but find at least a little compassion for him. I could feel the intense emotion when I read his words about William King that wasn't altogether unfamiliar to someone who's found their soulmate. Imagine losing the love of your life so tragically young and within the space of approximately a month. Just the simple lack of any evidence of any other romances, coupled with the challenges that had to have come with being in the LGBTQ community at such an unaccepting time, could explain his eccentric nature. And one can't help but at least feel some understanding for what could have been a soul forever in a state of mourning. Or he could have just been a racist, indecisive douchebag. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, commonly referred to as FDR, needs little introduction. The 32nd President of the United States served from 1933 until his death in 1945. He won an astounding 4 presidential elections, leading the country through the Great Depression and World War II. He built the New Deal coalition, got politics all squaresies with the fifth party system, and defined American liberalism. If you aren't flustered enough already over all those sexy details, hold on to your seat, because as Nellie says, it's getting hot in here. FDR was born to a prominent Dutch family in New York. In 1898, when he was 16, he was at his aunt's Christmas party when he spotted the 14-year-old Eleanor Roosevelt, his cousin, and asked her to dance. They got along just swimmingly, but Eleanor was busy with her own shit. She had a rough childhood, with both her parents dying by the time she was 10, and she also lost one of her brothers. At 15, after she had initially met Franklin, she set off for the Allenwood Academy in London, and had the privilege of studying with her incredibly influential feminist headmistress, Marie Souvestre. When she came back to the States, she kept running into Franklin, and they literally became kissing cousins. He proposed to her as they were strolling along the river of Groton Academy, where they were visiting Eleanor's younger brother. But even though she actually likes Eleanor, Franklin's overbearing, control-freak mom hears about the engagement, and she's like hell you're getting married, you're a child, abso-fucking-lutely not. And she tries to break off the engagement, telling them to keep the engagement on the DL, and then taking her son on a 5-week cruise, which backfired because absence makes the heart grow fonder. So after already having graduated from Harvard in 1903, when they get back, FDR goes on to attend Columbia Law so he can be closer to his main squeeze. He then married the fierce Eleanor Roosevelt when he was about 23 years old, and they popped out 6 kids like a litter of puppies. Their marriage had issues before it even began, largely due to the stage mom-like presence of FDR's mom. Even after they got married, his Oedipus complexed-out mom is still up in their grill like all the damn time. In fact, she owned the couple's home and went so far as to build her own house that had connections on every single floor, which made Eleanor feel just fantastic. Franklin was laid back and felt comfortable in the elite class he was a part of, while Eleanor was more introverted and shy, staying home to raise their children in the beginning of their relationship. She is quoted as saying sex was an ordeal to be endured, despite having their first 4 kids like one right after the other. Franklin had numerous affairs, one with Eleanor's own secretary, Lucy Mercer, which pretty much began when she walked through the door. Eleanor found some racy letters when she was going through Roosevelt's suitcase after he got back from serving in World War I, and Franklin was writing these things like, "Hey, Lucy, baby, sugar, toots, honey bun, what if I just divorce my cousin and, we get married?" And Lucy goes, "Ha, you have 5 kids, I'll know." And Eleanor is reading this, and she's like, "The fuck is this, Frank?" And he's like, I'll never see her again? So they stay married and basically become the Underwoods and build their own house of cards, with their relationship shifting to more of a political partnership. There was also the case of Frankie's mommy, who told him if he divorced his cousin, it would be bananas scandalous, and she would, in her words, not give him another dollar. Franklin goes on to serve in the New York Senate in 1910, then as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy under the Wilson administration before becoming the running mate of presidential candidate James M. Cox in 1920. But they lost to Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge, which, as we know, majorly sucked ass. It was then in 1921 that Roosevelt tragically fell ill with polio that was so debilitating he lost the use of his legs. But he was like, ain't nobody got time for that, and attempted to recover at a treatment center in Georgia specifically for those affected by polio. He returned to politics with Eleanor's encouragement, and she was like, hey, I got the speech and campaign appearances down, don't even worry about it. And he went on to become governor of New York in 1928, and Eleanor looks at him and goes, yeah, you're welcome. She made public appearances on his behalf for the rest of his career as a politician, including when he went on to win the presidential election in a freaking landslide in 1932. She completely redefined the role of First Lady and paved the way for everyone who succeeded her. She was the longest-serving First Lady of the United States and served as United States delegate to the United Nations General Assembly from 1945 to 1952. But at the time, she didn't have the same respect she's regarded with today. She was actually a really controversial figure because she refused to sit quietly on the sidelines, particularly on the rights of African and Asian Americans, World War II refugees, and women in the workplace. She also didn't hesitate to publicly disagree with her husband's policies. She was the first presidential sig-other to hold regular press conferences, write a daily newspaper column, a monthly magazine column, host a weekly radio show, and speak at national party conventions because sleep is for the weak. President Harry S. Truman later called her the First Lady of the World, in tribute to her human rights achievements. So the Roosevelts take office, and Herbert Hoover shakes his hand and goes, good luck, kid, peace out. Because the United States was right in the middle of the worst economic crisis in the history of the country, no big deal. But FDR was like, I kicked polio's motherfucking ass, and I'm about to bitch slap the crisis into next Tuesday. No sweat, I got this. It's all good, everyone. Papa Roosevelt is here, and I'm going to take care of it. Don't worry, babes, I got you. He was eternally optimistic, and everyone is feeling his good vibes, especially because his first 100 days were so damn busy. He issued a crap ton of executive orders that ushered in the New Deal, because apparently he also thought sleep was overrated. Like, he created all of these programs that gave government jobs to the unemployed. He regulated Wall Street, banks, and transportation, and encouraged the labor unions to expand while closely regulating business and high finance. But most importantly, he supported the end of Prohibition, which caused just about every American to go, oh, I'm voting for that guy next time around. And everyone went to the polls singing, shots, 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 shots. But while the economy improved super fast from 1933 to 1936, the conservative coalition looked around and went, hey, let's fuck some shit up. And they proceeded to block all proposals for major liberal legislation, with the exception of the minimum wage and business regulations, oddly enough. So in 1938, World War II is like, hey girl, hey, and Roosevelt backed China and the UK while remaining officially neutral until Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, at which point he said, I can't let that shit stand, Congress. War? War? War, everyone? Okay, let's go to war. Then World War II happened, which is not what the Dirty Bits really covers, but we can recommend some excellent podcasts if you're interested, like The History Dweebs, Season 2 of the Omitted podcast, Ray Harris Jr.'s The History of the World 2 podcast are some good examples. If you want some more deets on that one, just shoot us a message and we'd be happy to hook you up. So anyway, World War II took a huge toll on FDR's health. But it was also around this time that Frankie began seeing that Lucy character he was dallying around with years ago. So anyway, World War II took a huge toll on FDR's health. But it was also around this time that Frankie began seeing that Lucy character again he was dallying around with a few years ago. The Secret Service actually gave her the code name of Mrs. Johnson, and she was actually at his side when he sadly passed away only 11 weeks into his fourth term as president. A fact that remained hidden in history until the 1960s. Roosevelt's son Elliot also claimed his father had a 20-long-year affair with his secretary, Missy LeHand, and his other son, James, said there is a real possibility that a romantic relationship existed in regards to his father and the Princess Martha of Sweden, who just so happened to be living in the White House during a part of World War II, and the president's aides called the princess the president's girlfriend, And all these newspapers were all gossiping about how the two were shacking up. So it begged the question of how Eleanor felt about all this Clinton-esque tabloid bullshit, and it wasn't too tough to gauge. She once wrote to a friend saying, "I have the memory of an elephant. I can forgive, but I cannot forget." After the Lucy Mercer scandal, she set herself up in a separate house. And in turn, the president wouldn't answer her phone calls, so she had to go through his secretary if she absolutely had to get in touch with him. That's when she became the bitch on wheels history remembers her as, devoting her life to numerous social and political causes. Like, she would just go visit the White House whenever she wanted and he wouldn't even know about it. She was super tight with Amelia Earhart in the 30s, and one time they snuck out of the White House to party together. Amelia would take her flying, and Eleanor even went so far as to get her student permit herself before Franklin had to be a dick about it and say, "Yeah, no, not with the whole flying thing, babe, no." But Amelia and Eleanor remained friends and corresponded regularly throughout their lives. Eleanor had an even closer friendship with AP reporter Lorena Hickok, who was planning on writing a biography about the First Lady. Eleanor called her Hick in her daily 10 to 15 page long letters that she wrote, and said things like, "I want to put my arms around you and kiss you at the corner of your mouth. And I can't kiss you, so I kiss your picture goodnight and good morning." And at Franklin's 1933 inauguration, she actually wore a sapphire ring Hickok had given her. From what I gather, there's a huge debate between historians as to whether or not Roosevelt had a sexual relationship with Lorena. It was known that Lorena for sure liked the ladies, but there unfortunately isn't any concrete evidence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the two were actually a couple. Eleanor was also close friends with several out lesbian couples like Nancy Cook and Marion Dickerman, who were some rad businesswomen decades ahead of their time, in addition to Esther Lape and Elizabeth Reed, and her childhood teacher we mentioned above, who was also a known lesbian. She was at the very, very least way ahead of her time progressive, if not part of the community. There were also rumors linking her to a New Deal administrator who she worked with closely, as well as a New York State police sergeant who was actually assigned by the president to be her bodyguard. They were close buds and played tennis together. It was cute, but we don't know if they were having a roll in the hay or anything. Supposedly this was happening at the same time Franklin was sleeping with his secretary, and they were both just kind of cool with it. Biographer Jean Edward Smith says, "Remarkably, both Eleanor and Franklin recognized, accepted, and encouraged the arrangement. Eleanor and Franklin were strong-willed people who cared greatly for each other's happiness, but realized their own inability to provide for it." Which seems absolutely accurate when learning that when FDR was on his deathbed and he asked Eleanor to come back home and live with him, she went, "Nah, I'm good." Dwight Eisenhower was born in Denison, Texas, but was raised in Kansas by a big Pennsylvania Dutch family with a pretty strong religious background, though Eisenhower himself didn't belong to any organized religion until the 50s, supposedly because he was always relocating due to his military career, which was extensive, but he is most commonly known as the 34th President of the United States, serving from 1953 to 1961. Dwight was a moderate conservative, continuing the New Deal programs from Roosevelt's time, and was all about expanding Social Security, and he thought McCarthy was a douche. While he wasn't the biggest supporter of civil rights, he does have a super cool backstory where his dad basically started a business that didn't do well in the economy at the time, so the family fell into poverty and only had $24 to their name at one point. But his dad worked hard, learning to be a mechanic, and then eventually worked for a creamery, ending up making a comfortable life for the family. When Dwight was a freshman in high school, he busted his knee, and it turned into a leg infection that worked its way up to his groin. And the doctors were like, "Dude, you're gonna die. We need to take off the leg." And Dwight goes, "You can go fuck yourself and get the hell away from me with that hacksaw you're brandishing there." And he freakishly, amazingly recovered and kept his leg, but had to repeat freshman year. After graduation, he and his brother really wanted to go to college, but didn't have enough money, So they pulled a Marie Curie, Bronislawa Skłodowska, and did the whole you work, I study, then we tradesies thing. Dwight went to West Point, was a killer athlete, and his military career just took off. Over the years, he worked his way up to a 5-star general in the United States Army. Then during World War II, served as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in Europe. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Eisenhower was responsible for creating the major war plans to defeat Japan and Germany. He was super talented and kept getting promotions, and he goes to London to replace a general that nobody was really grooving on. So in 1942, Major General Dwight Eisenhower meets his chauffeur, Kay Summersby. She was born in County Cork, Ireland, but moved to London as a young woman, where she started out working as a film studio extra, then did a little photography, became a fashion model, all your basic bitch stuff. When Britain entered the Second World War, Kay Summersby joined the Mechanized Transport Corps, or the MTC, where she drove an ambulance during the London Blitz and fucking dominated at navigating the streets during blackouts and fog. Then the United States joined the Allies after the Germans declared war, and she was assigned to be a chauffeur to the high-ranking American military officers. So she met Dwight when he arrived, and they instantly hit it off. She eventually becomes his secretary in his home in England until 1945. He helped Kay become a U.S. citizen and a commissioned officer in the U.S. Women's Army Corps, where she eventually became Captain Summersby. She was awarded the Bronze Star Medal, the Women's Army Corps Service Medal, the European Campaign Medal, the World War II Victory Medal, and the Army of Occupation Medal. After the war, she was then awarded the British Empire Medal in the 1945 New Year's Honors List and was presented with a signed photo of Prime Minister Winston Churchill at his insistence. She went on to write her autobiography in 1975, which she titled Past Forgetting, My Love Affair with Dwight D. Eisenhower. And she's super clear that they had a romantic relationship, but never actually did the deed. And people were like, okay, so why didn't you mention this affair in your 1948 memoir, Eisenhower Was My Boss? And Kay supposedly says before her death, the general is dead. I am dying. When I wrote Eisenhower Was My Boss in 1948, I omitted many things, changed some details, glossed over others to disguise as best I could the intimacy that had grown between General Eisenhower and me. It was better that way. And it turns out, historians are incredibly divided on whether or not the affair actually happened, partially because the book was ghostwritten by Barbara Wyden when Kay was dying from cancer. According to Wyden, they tried to sleep together twice, but were unsuccessful because he had erectile dysfunction, so they only ever got so far as holding hands and sharing stolen kisses on walks and airplanes. While many people close to both Kay and Dwight said there's not a snowball's chance in hell they were together, President Harry S. Truman allegedly told author Merle Miller that in 1945, Eisenhower asked permission from General George Marshall to divorce his wife to marry Summersby, but Marshall refused. He also said the correspondence that would have proved this was destroyed from the Army archives, which sounds awfully fucking convenient. Most historians think Truman was mistaken or simply full of shit because he was bitter over not being invited back to the White House, and there's about zero evidence that there was anything more than a close friendship going on. Eisenhower biographer Gene Edward Smith found Miller's account plausible simply because a naval officer in Washington, Garrett Mattingly, who happened to be one of the guys who censored outgoing cable, told a similar story to his colleagues at Columbia University in the 50s. Smith put it best when he wrote, "Whether he and Kay were intimate remains a matter of conjecture, but there is no question that they were in love." William Campbell Preston Breckinridge was a Democratic representative from Kentucky, a member of the Masonic Lodge and the Knights Templar. Born in Baltimore, Maryland, he went on to earn his law degree and then entered into the Confederate Army in 1861 as a captain and eventually became colonel. He was eventually elected to the House of Representatives, and things were looking pretty good. Until 1893, when Madeline V. Pollard filed a lawsuit against William because he didn't marry her like he promised he would after his wife died. And everyone lost it over the news. His infidelity and weak defense actually led him to lose the lawsuit, and his career was over. Which was actually kind of a bummer because he was pretty ahead of his time in a lot of ways. He was quoted as saying, "The sooner Americans rid themselves of cruel racists in their midst, the sooner they will realize that their institutions are in no danger. Their civilization is not at stake, and that their permanent and practical, undisputed sway cannot be overturned." He also opposed literacy tests and said he hoped that all races might enjoy a common liberty secured by an imperial law. WCPB, as we like to call him, endorsed Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, took on black clients in his law practice, and believed that admitting the black race to the full employment of his civil rights, including the right to testify against whites, was a necessity for progress, and he believed the Democratic Party could be the tool to do so. But he ruined it all when he didn't fulfill a promise that he made to Madeline V. Pollard in 1893. And that's why you don't make promises you can't keep. Richard Mentor Johnson was the 9th VP in the Martin Van Buren administration from 1837 to 1841. He was the only president ever elected by the United States Senate under the provisions of the 12th Amendment. He came from this wealthy and politically connected family in what is present-day Kentucky. Consequently, Richard didn't receive a formal education until the age of 15 because the school bus didn't exactly make a trip out to the frontier. And when he's 16, he supposedly had to break off an engagement to a girl he liked because his mom flipped her shit over it when she found out. So Richard went all full emo mode and vowed to get back at her because, God, Mom, you don't get me. But even though they called off the engagement, a few months later, a little bundle of joy named Celia comes along. And the Johnson family was actually pretty chill about it, and they raised her despite the lack of a ring on Mama's finger, which was, pretty cool of them for the time. Richard studied law and was drawn into politics, just like his dad. He eventually was admitted to the bar, opened an office near Great Crossing, and later owned a retail store, as well as a few businesses with his brothers. He was known to work pro bono for the impoverished and opened his home to disabled veterans, widows, and orphans. After Richard's dad died, he inherited Julia Chin, who had an 8th African and 7/8 European ancestry and was classified as an octoroon at the time. She was a woman born into slavery in about 1790 and had grown up in the house together with Richard. He began a long-term relationship with her, and he treated her as his common-law wife because they were prohibited from marrying as she was a slave. She was the mother of his children and managed the plantation. When he left, he always told everyone, "Hey, my wife's in charge, listen to her, I'm gonna be pissed." But the relationship was a bizarre one. Richard called Julia my bride, and there was an oral tradition that claims that they had an unofficial wedding. She spent her time managing the Johnson estate for at least 6 months of the year and handled the finances. But he technically, owned her. She was his actual property, and she was supervising other slaves as a slave herself. She had more personal autonomy, but Johnson never legally emancipated her either, which kind of makes you think he had this weird idea of making sure she could never leave him. Not creepy at all. Their 2 daughters were acknowledged by Richard as his children, and were given his surname, in addition to receiving a regular education from home in order to avoid the judgy eyes of the neighbors. But at the time of his death, his surviving daughter, Imogene, wasn't allowed to inherit his estate. The court told her she was an illegitimate child born out of wedlock and didn't have any rights. The Fayette County Court states he left no widow, children, father, or mother living. Julia passed away in the cholera epidemic the summer of 1833, and Johnson was allegedly heartbroken. So to ease his sorrows, he began sleeping with another family slave who left him for another man. He responded by having her picked up and sold at auction, then sleeping with her sister, who was also a slave. David Walsh was a Massachusetts politician of the Democratic Party who served in the state legislature and was eventually elected governor. His parents were Irish Catholic immigrants, so he was naturally one of 10 children. His father made combs, but died when he was 12, and his mother ran a boarding house. He was a major isolationist, opposed the U.S. domination of the Philippines right off the bat, was a leading member of the America First movement, and he was not about the U.S. getting involved in World War II. Until the attack on Pearl Harbor, anyway. He and his fellow isolationist, Senator Burton Wheeler of Montana, proposed a plank for the party platform that read, "We will not participate in foreign wars, and we will not send our Army or Navy or Air Force to fight in foreign lands outside of the Americas." So Walsh was quite the character, and found himself a frequent topic in the press. Particularly, Time magazine loved picking on him. In 1929, Time published a detailed profile of Walsh and his voting record, showing he voted for more penalties for violating prohibition, and said the guy votes wet, drinks wet. The article said, "A bachelor, he is tall and stout. A double chin tends to get out over his tight-fitting collar. His stomach bulges over his belt. He weighs 200 pounds or more. Setting up exercises every other day at a Washington health center have failed to reduce his girth. He is troubled about it. His dress is dandified. He wears silk shirts in bright colors and stripes, and often stiff collars to match. His feet are small and well-shod. Beneath his habitual derby hat, his hair is turning thin and gray. Society is his prime diversion. Of secondary interest are motoring, sporting events, the theater. In Washington, he occupies an expensive suite of rooms at the luxurious Carlton Hotel on 16th Street. A good and frequent host himself, he accepts all invitations out, is one of the most lionized senators in Washington." Time magazine also took issue with the fact that he was so fake. They called him a gruff and bull-voiced debater, but that in private conversation his voice is soft and controlled. Time also said that impartial Senate observers rate him thus: a good practical politician, a legislator above the average. His political philosophy is liberal and humane, except on economic matters which affect the New England industry, when he turns conservative. His floor attendance is regular, his powers of persuasion fair. Along with 4 of his colleagues, Walsh also condemned anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany in a Senate speech on June 10, 1933. And with that being said, in 1942, the New York Post implied that Walsh was involved in a Brooklyn male brothel for U.S. Navy personnel that had been infiltrated by Nazi spies. The operation led to the arrest and conviction of 3 foreign agents, and the brothel's owner-operator, Gustav Beekman. The owner and several others arrested identified Walsh to the police as Doc, and said, "Oh yeah, he comes here all the time."
Baby, you spelled cum wrong again.
No, I did not. And they said he had just stopped patronizing the place right before the police had gotten there, and they had no problem graphically describing what the senator was into. President Roosevelt said he wasn't surprised and told his VP and Alvin Barkley, "Yeah, everyone knows he's gay." It was a trippy scandal because it was saying that Walsh was gay, which was, a huge thing at the time, a patron of a male brothel, and was possibly a dupe of enemy agents. The Daily Mirror called it Brooklyn's spy nest, also known as the swastika swishery. Walsh himself called the story a diabolical lie, demanded a full investigation, and got back to work because haters gonna hate. An FBI investigation revealed no evidence to support the New York Post charges, but it did accumulate quite a bit of what they called derogatory information. Whatever the hell that means. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said it was all bogus, and he wouldn't even insert the FBI report in the congressional record because it was so vulgar. He denied the charges related to espionage. He provided no specifics about the sexual activity at issue, and said the details of the charges were too loathsome to mention in the Senate or in any group of ladies and gentlemen. Time magazine had the final word, and concluded, The known facts made only one thing indisputable. Either a serious scandal was being hushed up, or a really diabolical libel had been perpetrated. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or corrections for me, feel free to leave a comment or send a message to Tawny at tawnyvoice.com. See you next Tuesday.
What got you started podcasting? Would you say that your show is safe for work? How would you describe your show to somebody who hasn't heard it yet? If you were trapped on a desert island with one person, one bottle of booze, and one book or movie, how would you fill those slots? Hi, my name's Jeremy, and I'm the host of the Podcast We Listen To podcast. If you'd like to hear those questions and many others answered by some of your favorite podcast hosts, come subscribe and give my show a shot. Whether it's history, comedy, spooky ghost stories, audio dramas, or true crime podcasts that you're interested in, find out more about your favorite hosts. Or find a new favorite show. Either way, come join me as I interview the hosts of the podcasts we listen to.
Hi, are you looking for a really interesting history podcast out there? Well, I've got the perfect one for you. My name's Scotty J, and every week, me and my two co-hosts and friends, Phil and Jeff, we sit and discuss topics from American history. Now, it might be a battle, it might be a person, or a speech, or an important event that people might have forgotten about. Now, you can catch us every week on the History Bastards, and you can listen to us on iTunes or at www.scottyj73.libsyn.com. Trust